You are listening to Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Part 11, November Awakening, written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. November Awakening, Chapter 1. Dueling M16s and AK-47s crack and pop, bullets hitting the dirt all around him. Mortars fly in from every direction, artillery shells exploding one right after the other, barked orders and screaming men. The ground quakes and shifts beneath him, lying flat out, his back pressed against the shallow wall of the ditch he's dug into, his arms over his head. He's on his left side, keeping his heart as close to the ground as possible. If he takes a hit, maybe he'll survive if his heart can still pump his blood long enough for medevac to get him out of here. The cries of his wounded and dying men rise and fall with each round of automatic gunfire, but his own weapon lies useless at his side. He ran out of ammo 20 minutes ago. Now he's just waiting it out, waiting for whatever it is coming for him. Silence falls, eerie after the roaring cacophony of battle. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. 4 1,000, all the way to 10 1,000, and he lowers his arms, lifting his head just 2 inches, so he can see over the bloody, twisted form of the downed soldier in front of him. As far as he can see, the broken bodies of his brothers lay, eyes staring lifelessly toward heaven, arms reaching, for him, for freedom, for home. "Doc! Help me, man." The voice, just a whisper, sweeps across the sea of human remains, and he surges up, mindless of his own safety, his eyes searching frantically. "Help me, I'm hurt real bad." The moan is joined by another. "Doc, over here!" And another. "Help me, Doc, I'm dying." He scrambles to his feet, no longer caring about enemy fire. Tripping over limbs and helmets, empty casings, he scans the carnage for any signs of life. The whispers and moans come faster now, louder, growing, crying out to him. "Doc! Doc! Help me! Save me!" He came out of his sleep like a drowning man, gasping for breath, his body drenched in sweat. He lay on his left side on the bare wood floor of his loft in the narrow space between his bed and the east wall, his back pressed against the plaster. His legs still twitched, fists clenched against his ears, the sound of his molars grinding against one another loud inside his head. When would it end? He could still hear the cries of his buddies, the moans. No, that was just the wind tearing it up outside. Doc reached for the flask he kept on the floor by his bed and unscrewed the cap. Empty. He lay there, panting, his tongue dry, swollen. He needed a drink, bad. But he couldn't get up off the floor, not just yet. He didn't know if his legs would hold him. He scrubbed his face with his hands, grimacing at the moisture on his cheeks. He only cried in his sleep. The ticking of the mechanical alarm clock on his bedside table was loud and solid and real in the stuffy stillness of his room. He homed in on it the way he always did, slowing his breathing to match its rhythm as it marched across time, bringing him with it back to the present. Out of the jungle, out of the trenches, out of the arms of the terror that gripped him in the dead of night. He needed air. The crisp November wind that tossed the mulberry leaves around outside would help. There was never any wind in Nam. Rain, yes. Sweaty, mosquito-infested humidity. Movement in the 8-foot-tall bamboo and razor-sharp elephant grass wasn't wind. It was death, armed with Russian M16s tipped with bayonets. Raising himself up an incremental inch at a time, he lifted his head above the barricade of his mattress, panic still rattling against his will. He had to get outside, out in the open, out where he could breathe without the nightmare filling his lungs. Leaning against the rail of his landing, Doc surveyed the moonlit steps down to the driveway below, eyes peeled for any suspicious movement, ears tuned to snapping twigs or unfamiliar chittering. Without turning his head, he scoped the neighborhood. All was as it should be, except for the low murmur of female voices carrying across the gurgle of the shallow stream that ran adjacent to his lot, separating the front half of the coach house trailer park from the back. But over the last few weeks, he'd grown accustomed to listening for Willow Goodhope and the little girl from the main building who'd recently lost the baby she was carrying. They often talked late into the night, bundled up, huddled close to the blaze in the fire pit on Willow's River Rock patio. He never eavesdropped. What they rambled on about for hours on end he couldn't imagine, but he knew Willow was talking the girl through some dark places. Doc thought he might be in a better place, too, if he had someone like the red-haired angel whispering to him in the dark. Slipping the pack of cigarettes from his coat pocket, he lit one up, knowing they'd probably catch a whiff of it and feel guilty, thinking they'd kept him up. Willow had approached him just last week about it, but he'd assured her he only heard them when he was outside. How could she know how tightly sealed he kept his barracks? It was cold, colder than he'd expected. One more cigarette, and he'd call it a night, and head inside to keep company with some cheesy television B-movie cast, and his refilled flask. November Awakening, Chapter 2. Doc watched from the front porch of Al's place as the rented U-Haul truck pulled away from the coach house trailer park, its 12-foot box packed to the gills with all the earthly belongings of the couple living above Prudence Merriweather in the main house. The two were moving in with Andrea's parents. They had reconciled after almost 5 years, and they had some making up to do, especially in light of the tragedy the kids had endured last month. Doc was glad for them. He knew what it was like to be estranged from family. He knew where Eleanor lived. He knew where the 2 girls lived as well, and that Tracy was married to Pete Jenkins, and Janine had been dating the same kid for at least a year now. But then most of her boyfriends only lasted about a year before she moved on, unwilling to commit to someone who might walk out on her someday. At least that's what Eleanor surmised. She wrote to him once a month, even though his only response was a monthly check in the mail. She kept him apprised of the goings-on of his daughters, but she never said anything about herself. He didn't know if she'd remarried, he didn't know if she was healthy, if she still worked as a secretary, or if she'd gone back to school as she'd dreamed of doing. For the last 31 years, Doc had sent her money and nothing else. She, in turn, sent him updates on his investments, their daughters, who were long past needing his money. But Eleanor kept cashing the checks, and out of guilt for abandoning them, he dropped another one in the mail every time he got paid. Over the last few days, watching the bittersweet and tentative reunion take place across the way, Doc couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to see his own family again. He grunted at the impossibility of the notion after all the years that separated them. He stood up to leave. "I'm taking off," he stated, not quite looking at Al. Thinking of his family always made him thirsty. Al just nodded, the 2 of them needing each other's conversation even less than they needed the company, and appreciating each other all the more for it. He couldn't sleep. It was well after midnight, and his mind wouldn't shut down. It didn't matter that he would be up in 6 hours to get to his job at the VA. Cursing in frustration, he sat up on the edge of his bed, glad at least that his restlessness hadn't led to more night terrors and flashbacks. Outside, the darkness harbored no threats, and he could hear very little, other than the splashing, gurgling creek and the nocturnal busyness of critters that slept all day. His was space number 1 at the Coach House Trailer Park, even though technically it wasn't a space. His apartment was the loft above the old carriage house where Eddie stored lawnmowers, chainsaws, and other gardening paraphernalia, even an old bobcat the park manager took out on occasion while working around the property. Through the brush and trees growing along the banks of the creek, he could see the flickering light of a fire burning on Willow's patio, the smell of wood smoke in the air. What was she doing up? Was she alone? With Andrea having been gone for nearly a week, he'd seen very little of the redhead of late, and especially not deep into the night like this. Maybe she'd be interested in some company. He could certainly use a draught of her soothing voice. He descended the steps and circled his car, his boots crunching softly on the driveway. He peered into each window, a habit formed of deeply entrenched paranoia, then headed at a leisurely pace to the sturdy bridge that crossed the creek to Willow's side. He approached softly, not wanting to startle her. Bundled in blankets, she sat upright in one of the lounge chairs pulled close to the warmth. On her lap was a pile of papers, and she was feeding them one by one to the hungry flames. She saw him long before she acknowledged him, he was certain of it, and that made him falter. He'd gotten good at reading the faces of the wounded. His job as a sanitation engineer, kept him in contact with broken people, but no longer responsible for them the way he'd once been. Ms. Goodhope was one wounded little girl. He'd seen that the first day she set foot on the property. He'd watched her rake and sweep, trim and scrub, turning the forlorn little cottage into a place fit for a fairy tale princess. Doc didn't know any fancy words for it, but he was pretty sure she was projecting her need to fix things in her own life on the place she was calling home for the time being. He had no illusions that she was staying. She wasn't like the rest of them who'd come here to wait for whatever it was coming for them. But he also knew the look of someone who was cornered, desperate, and Ms. Goodhope had that look about her tonight. He knew, too, how unpredictable a cornered, desperate creature could be. "Come on over, Doc. I won't bite." She'd read his mind, even though she still wouldn't look directly at him. As he approached, he could see why. Tears glistened on the pronounced angles of her cheekbones, her eyes bright in the flickering flames. "Pull up a seat. It's cold tonight." He grabbed the back of one of the green plastic patio chairs and drew it up close to the flames. He didn't say anything. He didn't think she expected or even needed any words from him just yet. Stretching out his legs in front of him, he crossed one ankle over the other, his boots clunky and male next to Willow's slender feet. She wore tiger-striped furry socks and wiggled her toes inside them toward the heat. "Mind if I smoke?" Willow snorted. "Not if you don't mind if I smoke." She gestured toward the plume that rose into the night sky from the blaze. "Did you hear about my visitors the other day? I'd spent the whole morning cleaning up around here and was burning the brush. Well, I discovered that although eucalyptus smells divine, the oily leaves create a whole lot of smoke. A couple guys from the fire station up the way stopped by to make sure I hadn't set the park on fire. They could see the smoke a mile away, literally." "I heard." "Of course you did." Silence fell between them again. Doc had never seen her this edgy before. Usually she wore her mysterious dark cloud with grace, the beauty of her spirit undimmed by her secrets. Tonight, though, she'd succumbed a little to the shadows, and he felt a camaraderie with her that only wounded warriors shared. She didn't question why he was out wandering around after midnight, and he didn't ask her why she was sitting out here in the dark. He smoked, she gathered up the scattered envelopes on her lap, stacking them neatly, and slipping a rubber band around the packet. "How's your tree?" he asked, tossing the filter of his cigarette into the fire. My tree?
That broomstick you've been paying homage to.
He pointed at the low-growing, scraggly thing perched on the bank of the stream at the edge of her patio. It looked hungover to Doc, like it had celebrated a little too hard the season before and was now spent, desperate for rest.
It doesn't look so good.
Willow smiled and swiped at a stray tear. That little tree has used itself up for me, Doc. I think this is the first year since moving to California that I didn't have to buy dried elderberries from out of state. You should see my freezer. Leaning forward, with an iron poker, she rather aggressively jabbed at a log that had broken in half and tumbled a little too close to their feet. It'll come back. Just you wait and see. In a few months, it'll be all green and fancy and laced with flowers, showing off.
Really?
Yep, that's the way God designed it. No reservations, Doc. Elderberry trees go all out, full throttle, wild and willing. They give and give and give some more. And then it's time to rest so they can start the giving all over again. She fluttered a hand at the skeletal branches. That, neighbor, is a true giving tree. Doc studied her more closely.
Reminds me of someone I know.
Don't, Doc. Please. Flattery will just get you kicked off my patio tonight. Her eyes shifted so she was looking at him, but she didn't turn away from the fire. It was a warning, but her candidness actually put him at ease. That being said, he wasn't going to be the first to look away, but he raised both hands in surrender. When she finally closed her eyes, he leaned forward to squint at the packet of envelopes still clutched on her lap, her long fingers folded tightly around the ends. He thrust his own work-roughened paws into his coat pockets, his thoughts slowly taking shape around an idea. Maybe she needed to hear about his tree.
What do you got there, Miss Goodhope?
When she opened her eyes, he dipped his head at the envelopes. He needed to know just how badly he was interrupting her first. Letters? You keep saying that.
What?
He didn't elaborate. He had all night. They're letters from my husband. She held one up, one she'd kept separate from the bundle. Except for this one. It's from Andrea.
From upstairs?
He nodded toward the outline of the main house behind them. Yes, I thought I'd be glad to get my place back to myself. But while Andrea was here, I had someone besides myself to feel sorry for. She sighed and withdrew the folded sheets of paper from the envelope that looked pink in the glow of the fire. Do you want to know what she wrote?
That's up to you.
Miss Goodhope was taking evasive action. She starts out talking about some girl stuff. I won't freak you out with that. She chuckled softly. Freak you out? Now I'm starting to talk like her. Sheesh. Doc grinned, and Willow began reading Andrea's words. My mom told me they've been looking for me all this time. She showed me flyers they'd printed and posted all over the place. There's even one on the missing children board at the Smart Mart in town, the same one I camped out at a few times that first year. I saw it myself this week. My mom wanted them to take it down, but they said they'd need a police statement to do it. I convinced her to cover for me on the way out so I could tear it down, and she did. My mother now thinks she's a criminal, and she's weirdly proud of herself.
Sounds like this is a good thing,
Doc interjected. Willow nodded. Yes, I'm so glad for her. For them. Her folks were sure she'd be back, but when she didn't come home, they went wild looking for her. I still think it's amazing that they could be just one town apart all these years and not know it. I mean, she was in a government-subsidized rehab facility. You'd think the police would have access to those records. She waved the paper in the air to fan smoke from her face.
Red tape, bureaucracy, privacy laws. She was a legal adult, right? As far as the law goes, if she doesn't want her folks to know where she is, they'd have to jump through some major hoops to get permission to get to her."
Willow shrugged. "I suppose that makes sense. And Andrea assumes no one who might recognize her ever spotted her because she worked nights and slept when most people were awake. She and George pretty much kept to themselves, too." "My dad thinks George is awesome," Willow continued to read. "My brother does, too, but he moved out a year ago, so we don't see him much. Just as well, I suppose. My folks say they want to work on fixing the broken parts of our relationship. I'm cool with that. It's different than it was, but underneath all the changes, we're still the same people who lived together in this house for all those years, you know?" Willow folded the paper in her lap and rested her head on the seat back behind her. "I like that," she murmured. "Underneath all the changes, we're still the same people we were." She turned weary eyes on him. "Do you think that's true, Doc? Are you the same guy you were before the war? Before moving here?" November Awakening, Chapter 3. Doc didn't respond for a long time, and finally Willow tucked the handwritten pages back into the envelope and shoved it under the rubber band, adding it to the bound stack of letters. When Doc finally spoke, he was sure he saw her flinch. He didn't know if he'd startled her by speaking into the settling silence, or if it was his words that struck her.
"Why are you burning your husband's letters?"
Now it was her turn to pause, the quiet weight of indecision heavy between them. "It's time," she murmured, her voice little more than a whisper. "I need to move past this place. I need to lay this season to rest." Her answer did little to enlighten him. He'd talk about himself, give her a reason to trust him.
"I had a tree once, a giving tree, as you call it."
One eyebrow disappeared under the curls that fell across her forehead, and she turned in her chair a little. He thought that admission might get her attention.
"It was 1967, the end of November, and we'd just ousted the VC. That's the Viet Cong, at Hill 875 near Dak To, our base. It wasn't permanent. We knew they'd be back, but we'd taken the hill under 8-1 odds, and for a few days we had a reprieve. Mail got through, and there was a package for me. My wife, Eleanor, she always sent me letters and pictures from home, of her, of our 2 daughters.
He paused, expecting her to ask about his girls, but she just watched him with those cat eyes of hers, glowing amber in the shifting light.
She opted not to send me boxes of stuff most of the time, mainly because she knew letters were easier to get through to me wherever I was, and easier to carry around with me wherever I went, too. I kept one in my pocket at all times.
He absent-mindedly patted the place over his heart.
But this time, when the supply truck showed up and unloaded the mail bags, she and the girls sent me a package, a 2-foot-long tube sealed with gray tape. I ripped one end open and started to pull out what looked like a piece of painted rebar.
He grinned, remembering his confused curiosity and the other Marines gathering around with questions of their own.
I got it halfway out when the first row of branches popped out. It was a miniature artificial Christmas tree, the kind where the branches fold up against the metal trunk. The stand, too, scissor-closed and was shoved in the tube next to the tree.
He nudged at another wayward, blackened branch with his toe, sending sparks shooting up into the night sky.
You'd have thought we boys had never seen a Christmas tree before, but I think it was more that we didn't know if we'd ever see one again. Christmas was just around the corner, and although we rarely spoke of it, we all knew there would be no white Christmas for any of us, not unless we went home in a body bag.
He paused, stroking his beard, the motion soothing as he felt his pulse quicken. Any time he thought about Nam, it stirred him up.
One guy, Toby Thompson, started singing "Oh Christmas Tree," then a few others joined him as I set the thing up on the ground in the dirt. As soon as that song was over, someone jumped in with another, carol after carol. It was 98 degrees and 100% humidity, and we were singing about snow-covered branches and winter wonderlands.
Willow smiled encouragingly, the letters in her hands now pressed close to her heart beneath her crossed wrists. Doc didn't think she realized what she was doing, but he saw it for the truth it was. Those letters held her heart, whether she liked it or not.
In a matter of days, we were back out on another search and destroy mission, and I had that cardboard tube shoved into my ruck. I didn't know how long the mission would take. It wasn't like what you see in the movies. We'd go out for a month or more at a time, not just a day trip and then back to the base to sleep in our freshly made-up bunks.
He shook his head at his memories.
We'd come back to base 30, 40, 50 days later, smelling of jungle rot, fear, vomit, and death.
He ran a hand over his face, then slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, reaching for his flask. He unscrewed the lid and held it out to Willow, offering her the only solace he could guarantee would work. She shook her head, the smile not leaving her face, but her eyes seemed to dim a little.
At night, when all had quieted down, the danger was even worse. Charlie, the VC, were like evil spirits, slipping in, catching us before we could scream.
He took a long draught. Yes, the familiar burn tasted like home, like sanctuary, like silence shutting out the roaring in his head.
We didn't care. We pulled that tree out and set it up whenever we got the chance, in a ditch, beneath a tree, behind a boulder. We didn't talk about home. It would have broken us. But if I let the night settle in before putting it up, I'd hear about it. For some reason, Miss Goodhope, that tree kept our fear at bay. It gave us hope, even when everything around us told us there was none.
Willow had stopped looking at him and now studied her elderberry tree. Her eyes glistened, on the verge of brimming over.
Everyone wanted to touch it. They'd rub the branches between their fingers, like they could make it smell like Christmas if they bruised it hard enough. One kid, John Lewis, got an ornament from his wife, one of those picture frame kind with a picture of his dog in it. A black lab named Lucky Dog. He tied it tight to the top branch.
Doc took another swig, remembering.
I took that tree with me into Quezon a month after Christmas. You know anything about the Tet Offensive?
Willow shook her head. Tears dropped slow and steady to her lap, some falling on the packet of letters where they were absorbed quickly into the paper fibers made thirsty by the dry heat from the fire. For some reason, Doc deeply appreciated each drop she shed.
Doesn't matter. It was war. Me and my buddies were sardined into a C-130 and dropped into the middle of the U.S. Marine base in Quezon under siege. In the 73 days my troop fought, I didn't set that tree up once, but somehow everyone knew I had it. They'd find me, ask if they could see the tree, touch it, and I'd open up the flap of my ruck and slip it out just far enough for the top branches to open up, for Lucky Dog to give them a reminder of home and of what they were fighting for.
She still didn't speak, and Doc took another swig and capped the flask, sliding it back in his pocket.
John Lewis never made it back from Hill 861A for the ornament, or his dog, or his wife.
Doc, please. It was a whisper, one that made him straighten up in his chair a little. I can't take it. Not tonight. But he saw in her something he recognized. He saw anger, rage, fear. He saw denial shining out of her eyes like a white flag, but he wasn't going to stop now.
I still have that tree, Miss Goodhope. It sits on my dresser, and that dog watches me, waiting for the man he loves to come home to him.
Stop! Doc stood up, needing to step away from her to assess the situation from a safe distance. Not that he was afraid of her, but maybe a little afraid for her. He'd better tread lightly lest he trigger a landmine and blow them both to smithereens.
Why are you burning those letters, Willow Goodhope?
He asked the question quietly from a good 10 feet away, the sound of the creek competing with the rumble of his voice, but he could see that she'd heard him. She looked down at the packet in her hands and smoothed a bent corner on the top envelope, her mouth clamped shut.
Willow.
Go home, Doc. I don't want you here any more. There was death in that voice.
Willow.
Go home, Doc. The words came out raw, compressed, a wail flattened between pain on one side and resistance on the other. She lurched to her feet, her blanket slipping down her arms, her unbound hair springing wild around her face and shoulders. She looked like an angry goddess, all lit up, the color of the flames themselves. But Doc stood his ground. And the dam broke. Her body began to tremble, then heave, the look on her face one of shock and dismay. She pressed her fists to her mouth as though she could shove it all back inside, but great, gasping sobs tore out of her. Her eyes wide, they overflowed with her anguish. Then her knees buckled. Doc lunged for her, catching her before she crumpled, and he held her against him, wrapping his beefy arms around her. November Awakening, Chapter 4. It had been a long time since he'd comforted a beautiful woman. He didn't know if he should pat her shoulder like a baby, smooth her hair like a little girl, or rub her back like a lover, so he did none of the above. He just held her while she emptied herself out. I'm sorry, Doc, she finally muttered against his shoulder. She'd pulled a tissue from the layers of clothing she wore and dabbed at her eyes, her nose. Doc cleared his throat.
You asked if I thought we were still the same people underneath all the changes.
He paused. How did he say the things in his heart that he'd never really put to words before?
Well, I came home a different man than the one who left, I can assure you. Someone Eleanor didn't know. Someone I didn't even know. I came home to a country that hated me for fighting in a war they'd turned against. You probably weren't even born yet, so all you know of it is what they taught you in school or told you on TV. But the first piece of rotten fruit that hit me in the chest hurt worse than any of the hits I'd taken in Nam, and I got angry.
It still made his blood boil to this day. The rage he'd seen on the faces of those who jeered at him in his uniform, who screamed curses and slurs against him, calling him baby killer and warmonger, and worse, still made his own blood boil.
And I had, and still have, a right to be angry at the way we were treated coming home. We were heroes, all of us, even the crazy ones. But I took my anger out on the wrong people, and I found comfort in the wrong ways.
He patted his coat, thumping the flask in his pocket. It bumped comfortingly against his rib cage. Willow didn't speak, but he knew she was listening to every word he spoke, the top of her head half tucked up under his beard. She seemed to find comfort in his arms, so he didn't pull away. It was easier for him anyway, not to have her staring at him while he tried to find his words.
I took it out on Eleanor, on my girls.
He continued, the usual lump in his throat that lodged there whenever he tried to talk about that time. Tonight, though, This woman's suffering seemed even greater than his, and he pushed past it.
I knew I was doing wrong, and I wanted to stop, but no matter how hard I tried to be a better husband, a better father, I couldn't get a handle on the bitterness and regret and anger that always caught me by surprise. That war took a part of me, Willow Goodhope. I watched my brothers fall.
His voice caught, and he brought up one hand to tug on his beard again.
I tried. Believe me, I tried. And the only thing that seemed to take the edge off it all was booze.
He chuckled wryly.
But being a drunk is no way to be a husband or a father, and I chose my buddies Jim and Jack over Eleanor, Tracy, and Janine. One day, I packed my bags and I left them. I left them so they'd be safe from me.
Willow raised her head and lifted teary eyes to his. She sniffed loudly from behind her tissue before asking,
"Are you dangerous, Doc? Am I safe with you?"
He snorted and rolled his eyes.
"I've seen too much in my day to be called safe, I'd venture to say."
He smiled sadly, staring into the fire. He'd played this game with himself 100,000 times. Could he go without the drink so he could go home again? Could he maybe just try one more time? But there was no way. His body would boycott. His blood would thicken in hours and he'd die. Or he'd hit the edge and explode on someone. On his wife, his daughters, his grandchildren. No, he was better off here, watching them all from a distance.
"I'd like to think there's still a little of the old me underneath all the ugly you see."
His hands moved up to her shoulders, and he held her at arm's length so he could look her in the eye.
"I do know this, though."
He waited until she met his eyes.
"You, Miss Goodhope, aren't safe here by yourself. No harm will come to you, not physically. Not while I'm here, I can promise you that. But I can't do anything to stop your heart from shriveling up and dying."
She frowned. He could tell she already guessed where he was going with this.
"This is no place for someone like you, Willow. The coach house is the end of the road. It's a holding ground for old soldiers like me, waiting for the last flight out of here. You need to go home."
He'd gone this far, he might as well go for broke.
"You need to go home and make things right with that man of yours."
Willow stepped back, and Doc let her go. She moved closer to the fire and crossed her arms tightly. She was closing off. "I can't go home, Doc. I just can't." He didn't argue, but she shook her head as though he'd contradicted her. "It's too much to ask of me."
"I'm not asking, Willow. I'm telling you that it's time to clear out of here. It's time to go home. Take it from a man who's thought about home every single day since leaving."
"Well, why don't you go home? When was the last time you saw your daughters?"
"It's too late for me."
He shifted his weight over his feet, knowing intuitively that she wouldn't accept that as an answer. Now she was mocking him. This time she drew it out longer and louder.
"I left 31 years ago, Miss Goodhope. Janine was just a few years old. I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen my daughters since walking out. One hand. And of those times, only 3 of them were actual visits. The other 2, the last 2, were without their knowledge or Eleanor's permission. I kinda messed up the last visit, and she wouldn't let me come again until I could do so without the bottle."
"Then you don't have the right to tell me to go home." She returned to her seat and glared up at him for a few moments. "It's easy for you to stand there, half-tanked already, and order me to man up. But you have no idea what that would require of me. You have no idea, Doc."
"Well, what on God's green earth did the man do to you? I saw the way he looked at you, woman. That wasn't hatred or anger. What are you so afraid of?"
Willow scooped up the letters that had fallen to the stones and traced a finger along the lines of the handwritten addresses. Finally, she pointed at the chair he'd abandoned. "Please sit. I have a story for you, too." She waited until he was situated, feet stretched out to the warmth again. After he lit another cigarette, she withdrew a small picture frame from the pocket of the jacket she wore and handed it to him. Doc studied the image in the flickering light. Then a sizzle of alarm jolted through him as he recognized the smiling man in jeans and a flannel shirt. Nothing like the gunmetal gray suits he wore whenever he came to see Al. But it was the child who made his gut clench. There was no doubting the little one's parentage. He was afraid to look at Willow, to see the resemblance in living color. "Christian, you've already met." She finally spoke, her voice going flat again. "Julian, our son, would have been 3 this month. In 2 weeks, on November 26th, in fact. He had my hair and Christian's hands, my glow-in-the-dark skin, and my husband's teeth. His eyes were his own, though." Something about the way she spoke made him think he didn't really want to hear this story. He squinted down at the frame in his rough hands, wishing he'd never seen it. November Awakening, Chapter 5.
"So you have a son."
He handed the picture back to her. Willow nodded, her thumb moving back and forth over the faces in the frame as though absently trying to rub them out. "Yes. This time last year, Christian had just passed his state boards and had joined the firm where he works now. I had just turned in my 2-week notice at the beginning of the month to the little cafe where I worked. I didn't work many hours there, not since having Julian, and the couple that owned it knew I would move on eventually. I loved it because they were good people, Doc, not because of the money. I didn't make squat there, just enough to pay for babysitting and the gas in my car to get there and home again. But I was almost afraid to let it go, and I came up with excuse after excuse to keep working." "There you go again."
"Sorry."
He drew his thumb and forefinger across his lips in a zipping motion. "It was finally Mama Dosh, the cafe owner and a good friend to boot, who told me I needed to quit or she'd fire me." Willow smiled ruefully. "I can't tell you how relieved I was to have that decision taken from me. I turned in my notice the next day. The day before my last day at Cafe Sienna, I knew they'd be having a goodbye party for me, and I wanted to look good for the pictures. I wanted to preserve for posterity the last evidence that I'd once been more than a stay-at-home mom and wife." She snorted, but it was laced with derision, not humor. "Why, you ask?" She shrugged in answer to her own question and tossed a twig she'd been mangling into the fire. "I suppose I'd bought into the stigma that being a stay-at-home mom made me a little less of a woman, a little less of a success. I didn't have a career I could do from home that would somehow validate my time there. And even though I loved my baby boy to distraction, I felt guilty for wanting to spend every waking moment just making him smile. So, that morning, Christian and I were both in our own worlds. He was off to prove his worth in the courts, having his first real case to call his own, and I was off to prove that I wasn't selling out, that I wasn't becoming less." She pulled the lapels of her coat around her, hunkering down a little, like a turtle that wanted to disappear inside her shell altogether. "Christian was frustrated that I wasn't more available to help him. I was frustrated that he hadn't ironed his shirt the night before, and Julian had a terrible case of the spills that morning, slowing everything I did to a crawl. He somehow got the lid off his cup and poured milk all over the carpet in the living room, Next, he knocked my half-full glass of water off my bedside table, drenching the pile of books on the floor beside it. Finally, he tried to pull the tea bag from my cup on the bathroom counter. Thankfully, it was almost room temperature, and the whole cup came down, splattering my pants and shoes and shattering the teacup, a special one of my mother's. Doc stroked his beard. He recalled very little about those early days when his girls were little. In my frustration, I did something totally uncharacteristic of me. I found an overstimulating cartoon on television, plopped him down on the floor in front of it, and handed him a bowl of his favorite crackers. He was amazed at his good fortune, and smiled at me like I was the most amazing mother in the whole world, even though I knew otherwise. I couldn't stay angry at him. I bent down, kissed him on the top of his mop of curls, and headed back to the bathroom. Christian dashed in and kissed me goodbye. All was forgiven. I heard him say goodbye to Julian. Then the front door opened and closed. Willow stopped talking, and Doc watched her swallow, hard, twice. He recognized that lump. I remember sighing dramatically, my straight iron undoing all the curls in my hair, thankful that I was finally getting a moment of peace and quiet. She rolled her eyes. And in that moment, like a flashback, it suddenly occurred to me that the front door had opened a second time. Sheer panic, like nothing I've ever known before, washed over me, and I dropped the iron and ran. Julian was gone. The door stood open, and Christian was backing down the driveway, sitting too high up in his pickup to see Julian, to see our baby, darting around the back of it to get to him. Doc held up his hand like she'd done earlier. He'd heard enough, but she wasn't finished. She turned hollow eyes on him, a piercing black gaze that made his toes curl. In a voice as cold and sharp as a layer of ice, she said, "I look at my husband, and I see our selfishness. I see my failure. I see his lofty ambition, his guilt, my shame. My guilt, his shame. And I don't think there's enough love in the whole world to cover the multitude of sins we committed that day." What could he say? What mere words could he offer that would ease the pain this girl was enduring, even as she sat like a black hole in front of him? Oh, she deflected it by helping others, by giving and giving and giving some more, by offering hope, even when there was none left over for herself. But he knew it was only bandages. And Doc knew all about bandages, and running, and destructive behavior. "Don't burn the letters." Once again, that's not your call to make. "You'll regret it. You don't need any more regret on your plate, Willow Goodhope." Without a word, she tossed him the packet. He caught it and slipped it in his coat next to his flask. After a pause, he said, "Willow." "What?" "At the risk of sounding trite, I want to tell you something a buddy of mine said to me a couple years ago. I don't know if it will help. Honestly, it hasn't fixed much in my life, except to help me be more understanding of myself. But maybe it will be what you need to hear." "I don't know if I want to hear it right now, Doc." He chuckled at her honesty. "I'm sure you don't. I don't really want to speak it either, because then I'm stuck hearing it again, too." Willow shrugged non-committally. He took that as permission to speak. He said, "Doc, you'll never forget it, so stop trying. You'll never be able to let it go, to be done with it. You have to own it, because it's part of you now." Willow didn't look at him, but she didn't stop him either. "Here's the clincher, Willow," he went on to say.
You have every right to have these feelings, this anger, this pain, but you do not have the right to make others suffer for it."
Willow only nodded. Whether she agreed or just did so to be polite didn't matter. At least she'd heard him out. They sat together in silence while the fire burned low. Then Willow began to hum. Her voice was gentle, soothing, in the same way that she spoke, and Doc sunk down in his chair a little lower. Her humming turned to words, and as he listened, he began to feel like an intruder, like someone who no longer belonged in the middle of her pain. "In the lingering silence I still hear your whispered sigh, but your hand in mine tells me you're leaving. You must not know how much I need you, that every moment you stay keeps me breathing." Doc stood up slowly and stretched. Maybe now he could sleep. He waited until she looked at him, then patted the pocket where he'd tucked the letters.
"I'll keep these safe for you, Miss Goodhope. You get some sleep now, you hear?"
She nodded. "Thanks for keeping me company, Doc. Sorry I'm such a mess." She didn't get up. Doc brushed a hand over the top of her head, the thought just now occurring to him that she was probably younger than his daughters.
"We're all a mess, little girl. That's why we like you here at the coach house."
November Awakening, Chapter 6. Early the next morning, Doc shoved open his front door with a shoulder. It usually didn't start sticking until the rains came. It wasn't stuck, though. Propped against the outside of the door on the landing was a basket, one made of twigs, the contents covered with a small quilt. He picked up the basket and lifted the corner of the blanket, already knowing who'd brought it. He didn't know how she'd made it to the top of his stairs without him knowing. That was a first in all the time he could remember. In the basket was a plate of at least a dozen warm muffins. Had the girl even slept last night? A small pillow or cushion of some kind, the now familiar picture frame lying face down in the bottom of the basket, and an envelope with his name on it. He opened it and pulled out a few pages of pale yellow paper covered with Willow's feminine script. "Doc, I don't even know your real name. Do you have one? Thank you for being Jesus to me last night. Whether you believe in him or not, you gave me a glimpse of him in your kindness, your words, even, especially, when I was so ungracious and inhospitable to you. In this basket are a few things I want to explain. The muffins are made with berries from my giving tree. There's a small pillow I made for the nights I couldn't sleep, and I want you to have it. Like your friend's words, it may or may not help you, but it's intended for good. The herbs inside are supposed to be soothing, to help calm your nerves, help you sleep. Just tuck it into your pillowcase at night. It's aromatherapy, something I love, but something I know not everyone ascribes to. Do give it a try, but if it isn't your thing, consider it a fanciful gift from a silly girl." The photo of Julian and Christian. Can I ask you a huge favor? Do you think you might be willing to tie it to your tree next to Lucky Dog? At least until I'm ready to take it back? I'd be honored, and far less likely to do anything not honorable with it. There's one more thing in the basket, Doc. It's a prayer. I'm praying for reconciliation in your life. No daughter should be without her father, nor should a father be without his little girls. I don't know about your marriage, and I have no leg to stand on, but I'm praying you'll at least try to make amends. Don't tell me it's too late. It's never too late. Doc, there is still some of that same guy in there under all the changes. I saw him last night, and if I, practically a stranger, could recognize him, I'm certain your wife and daughters would recognize him too. You don't have to defend yourself to me, or explain yourself to me, or even tell me what you're going to do in response to this. It's none of my business. Just know that I'm praying. Your friend and neighbor, Willow Eve Goodhope, my real name. Doc grinned at the girl's cheekiness and tried to ignore the unsettling sensation that grew in the pit of his stomach as he read over the last item on her list. He reached back into the basket, peeled back the plastic wrap over the plate, and snagged one of the still-warm muffins. He took a bite and grunted. She could work magic with the fruit of that tree. Heading back inside, he tossed the little cushion on his bed. He didn't know anything about aromatherapy, but the way it smelled made him think of Willow Goodhope and baked goods and fire smoke, and that was soothing in and of itself. He picked up the small photo and peered down into the faces of two people who gazed at the photographer with uncensored love. The duo would be the only other ornament on his little Christmas tree, but they belonged on the top branch beside Lucky Dog. Of that, he had no second thoughts. The envelope with her note he left in the basket. He'd think about that later. Post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what they told him he had, back in the early 80s during one of his futile attempts to change his ways so he could go home. But he didn't need any diagnosis to know that. He didn't need some teenaged med student trying to explain to him why he couldn't hold up under the stress, why he wasn't right in the head. He'd heard about this stuff all his life. They used to call it shell shock when he first came home, or battle fatigue, but in the 80s, a new label had been created for it, qualifying those diagnosed with PTSD to receive quality psychological evaluation and treatment, minimizing the implication that a person affected by PTSD was weak or insufficient somehow. Eleanor had begged him to get help when he first came home, but at the time, he thought he just needed to unwind a little. The booze helped with that, but the nightmares, the flashbacks, nothing took the edge off those. Doc finally realized the war had become a part of him, and he ran. And clearly, on some level, Willow was suffering from it too. He didn't know if she had night terrors or if she used some kind of herb to self-medicate. He knew she didn't drink. But all day, he couldn't stop thinking about her praying for him. His mind kept wandering back to the last time he'd seen Eleanor. What was it, 8 years now? And how kind she'd been to him, even as he inadequately explained why he couldn't interact with the girls. Besides his troop, only Eleanor knew how important that Christmas tree had been to him. Since the war, he'd never told another soul about it until last night. Why he'd opened up to Willow Goodhope about it baffled him at first, but the routine of his job today had given him some time to think about it a little differently. There was something empowering about sharing the stories of his grief with someone who was hurting like he was. Talking about the Christmas tree had been unexpectedly cathartic, and it had brought Eleanor to the forefront of his thoughts. By the time Doc got home, he could feel the long night he'd had. All he wanted to do was crawl in bed and get some rest, even if he didn't sleep. He was just getting out of his car when he saw Christian Goodhope's silver Avalon pull around the front of Al's place. Doc was a little surprised to see the guy. According to Al, his case had been fully resolved, thanks to Christian Goodhope. So why was he here? But Christian didn't stop at Al's. Doc stood at the door of his car and watched as the man drove slowly across the bridge to Willow's place, the pop and crack of the gravel under the tires, a faint echo of battle sounds. Had she taken his advice? Had she made peace with her husband? Invited him here? Was it possible that she was praying for reconciliation in Doc's life because she was doing a little reconciling herself? but the silver car only slowed in front of Elderberry Croft, then moved on. Doc frowned. Although he thought the two of them needed to kiss and make up, he wasn't going to stand by and let the guy harass her if she wasn't ready to make amends.
"Looks like I've got a little security issue here,"
he muttered. Forgetting his fatigue, he shoved his hands in his pockets and walked the opposite direction around the park. Unless Christian Goodhope was driving like a lunatic, Doc would intercept him conveniently near Eddie's place. November Awakening, Chapter 7. Sure enough, the silver car was rounding the bend in front of Space Number 8, Shelley Little's place. Doc waited until he was just across the bridge that spanned the stream between Shelley's and Eddie's trailers before stepping onto the drive directly in front of him. Christian stopped abruptly, pebbles spitting out from under his tires. Doc was good at intimidation. His cap low, his hands in his pockets, and his feet in a gunslinger stance, he puffed out his chest and straightened his shoulders, giving him a few more inches of breadth. He was a formidable sight. He'd been told many times before. Christian tentatively rolled his window down just enough to talk. "Hey, Doc." Good, he remembered. But Doc wasn't interested in playing any game of nice.
"What are you doing here, boy?"
Christian didn't answer for a moment, studying Doc from behind the half-raised, slightly shaded glass of his window. Doc stood unmoving, hoping against hope the guy wouldn't lie to him and give him reason to change his mind about Willow reconnecting with him.
"I came to see Willow, but then thought better of it. I was out near Glendale today and was driving home the back way to avoid the freeway traffic. I knew I'd be close, and I called, but just got her answering machine. I left a message and thought I'd hope for the best. But now?"
Doc could see his shoulders rise just a little.
"Like I said, I'm having second thoughts."
Doc actually felt sorry for the guy.
"You're not supposed to be here. Not now that you're done with Al. Did you forget that?"
I know. Christian frowned, but he must have heard the change in Doc's voice because he turned off the engine and climbed out of the car. He propped a hip against the wheel well, casual but respectful.
"I need to know. Is she okay?" She's okay, yes."
"It's a bad time for her, Doc. For us. November is a bad month."
"I know. She told me."
"She did?"
"About Julian, yes."
Doc didn't want him thinking she was pouring out her heart to him about her husband. He shouldn't have worried.
"Oh, good. That's good. I'm glad she found someone she could talk to.
Willow wouldn't want to be a burden to anyone. She'd keep it all inside and die smiling before she'd let on that she was hurting. Well, the guy obviously knew his wife.
I kind of forced it out of her last night."
"I see." Christian nodded, but his face flooded with concern, his hands clenched and unclenched.
"Mind if I ask how?"
"Huh, a little territorial, are we? Maybe he'd push the guy a little and see what he was made of."
"Neither one of us could sleep, so she lit a fire, I brought my whiskey, and we told each other war stories."
Christian's eyes narrowed.
"Really?"
"Yep." "I don't believe you."
"Well, Mr. Goodhope, you'd better believe me. I told her about my trench, and she told me about hers. Watching your husband take out your kid is about as brutal as it gets."
His sentence was cut off by the lightning speed of Christian's fist connecting with his jaw. Doc stumbled a little, then spread his stance again and put up his beefy fists.
"Oh, ho, ho, we got ourselves a fighter, not a lover."
Why was he goading the kid? Why was he picking this fight? What on earth did he hope to gain from this? But Christian had stepped back and was reaching for his car door. He shook out his hand, obviously hurting.
I don't want to fight you, Doc. I know I won't win. Catching you by surprise is the best I can hope for."
He dropped into the seat and pulled the door closed behind him.
"But I will tell you this. If you say anything to my wife even remotely as out of line as what you just said to me, I'll be back, and I won't be such a gentleman."
He started the car and began to drive slowly, straight toward Doc.
"Better move, Doc," he called out the open window. "I don't want to add hit and run to my day's record."
Doc stepped aside and let the car pass. He opened and closed his mouth a few times.
"Nice right hook,"
he muttered, the pain in his jaw growing and spreading in much the same way his respect for the younger man was growing. Christian Goodhope was the kind of guy he'd trust at his back. That night, Doc waited up for her. He dragged a chair out onto his landing and waited. Sure enough, just around 11, he heard the telltale signs of activity coming from across the stream, the light on her porch bright. He headed straight over.
"Let me,"
he offered, taking the load of wood and the box of matches from her. She stood back and watched as he efficiently laid the iron grill with the split logs and a few pieces of tightly crumpled newspaper. When he had a nice blaze going, she thanked him, but still eyed him warily, correctly expecting that there was more to his visit than chivalry.
"I'm here to make you a deal."
Doc wasn't mincing any words tonight. His jaw hurt, and he'd gone easy on the booze tonight to make sure he'd be awake to talk to her. He just wanted to get this over with and go to bed. At least his beard covered the swollen, discolored jawline, and he wouldn't have to come up with some lame story for work. "Shall we sit?" She seemed more like her normal self, her movements fluid, her hair pulled back in a soft braid that curved around to fall forward over one shoulder. "Would you like something to drink? A muffin? Soup? I made some really good potato soup for dinner."
"I'm fine."
He held his hands out to the fire. He'd built it nice and hot.
"If you want to sit, feel free. I'm just not planning on staying."
She sat, drawing the edges of a heavy shawl around her shoulders. She was dressed warmly. Her feet were in a pair of fur-lined boots tonight.
"I want to make you a deal," he repeated.
"Right." She studied him, her face calm, her gaze steady, but he sensed her coiled emotions as she waited for him to expound.
"About your prayer."
"Oh, okay." She blinked a few times, the only evidence that he'd surprised her.
"I want to do my part to get an answer to that prayer, but in order to do that, you have to do something for me."
"Ah. What exactly am I supposed to do for you, pray tell?" She still hadn't looked away, and now the directness of her gaze was starting to make him feel uncomfortable. "And what happened to your face?" He ignored the second question and answered the first as simply as he could.
"I want you to call your husband. It's time. You two have something worth fighting for. And in return, I'll contact Eleanor. I don't know that there's anything left between us, and I don't even know if she's still single. For all I know, she now prefers women. But I'll contact her on one condition. You, Miss Goodhope, will get together with your husband."
She didn't speak for so long, he thought she was ignoring him.
"Willow?"
"I heard you."
"Well?"
"I'm thinking."
"What do you mean you're thinking? It's a yes or no. Either you will or you won't."
Did she have any clue as to what she was doing to him? Not only did he want to see her and Christian find a way to face their loss together, instead of pulling away from each other, he wanted to see them leaning on each other as they faced the future together. But his own future was in the balance too. If she said no, then he was off the hook too. Except that he didn't really want her to say no. No matter how he thought it through, no matter how many reasons he came up with why it wouldn't work, No matter how many times he reminded himself of the loser he'd become, the idea of contacting Eleanor had stuck in his craw, and the longer it was there, the more he liked it. Then Willow smiled, tentative, almost shy, her face lighting up, but Doc was pretty sure it had nothing to do with the firelight. Christian is taking me to coffee tomorrow night. He called me an hour ago, and for whatever reason, probably something to do with you, Doc, I answered the phone. She seemed to glow, even though her expression contained a little uncertainty and sadness in it. I'll fill you in on the details when I get home. We hope you have enjoyed our production of November Awakening, Elderberry Croft, Seasons of the Heart, Part 11. Written and narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2014 by Becky Dowdy. Production copyright 2022 by Becky Dowdy. This is a Brave Hearts Press audio production. Thank you for listening.